When time passed softly in Asgard, the gods began to know one another not just as companions in a bright realm, but as beings who shared long silences, small habits, and the slow comfort of routine. Each day was much like the last, yet never exactly the same. The sun moved in a patient curve, the air drifted gently, and the sound of footsteps on polished stone carried lightly from one hall to another. Odin often rose before the others. He would sit near the edge of a Laskjalf's balcony, looking over the wide plain that spread beneath the golden roofs. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, would flutter out in quiet arcs, their wings whispering rather than beating. Sometimes he would remain still for hours, eyes half closed, following thoughts that wandered like distant clouds. Frigg would pass by with a faint smile, placing a hand on his shoulder before continuing toward her gardens. They rarely spoke in the mornings. Silence seemed sufficient. Frigg's garden stretched beside a narrow stream. The air there was always mild, never too warm or too cool. She grew herbs with silvery leaves, flowers that opened slowly through the day, and small fruit trees that leaned slightly toward the light. When she tended them, she hummed low, a tune without rhythm or purpose. Birds often came to rest among the branches, their songs blending with the trickling of water. Odin sometimes joined her there, saying little. They would walk between rows of plants, occasionally stopping to observe a bee or the way sunlight touched a leaf. It was not love as mortals imagined, fiery or loud, but something steadier, like the slow growth of roots underground. Thor, meanwhile, preferred the open sky. He spent much of his time wandering the borders of Asgard, where the plains met the thin veil between realms. His hammer, Mjolnir, hung from his belt more as a symbol than a weapon. He used it rarely, and mostly for small acts, breaking a stubborn stone that blocked a stream, or tapping thunder softly across the clouds to guide rain. When storms came, they were never harsh. They rolled gently, washing the air clean. Sometimes Thor would sit beneath a tree after rain, watching droplets slide down the bark. He felt no need for great battles yet. Strength, he thought, could wait until the world required it. Baldur often walked with him. He spoke of light, of the way it changed when clouds passed, or when the day leaned toward evening. He had a fondness for delicate things, a feather fallen from a bird, or a single drop of dew. Thor, who was less observant of such details, would listen patiently. Their friendship was quiet but steady, like the balance between sunlight and shade. They disagreed on small things. Baldur liked still mornings. Thor preferred the soft rumble of distant thunder, but neither tried to convince the other. Each accepted the difference as part of the calm pattern of their days. Heimdall, who watched the bridge Bifrost, lived somewhat apart. His hall stood near the edge of the heavens, where the rainbow stretched like a thin mist over the space below. He listened constantly to the faint hum of distant winds, to the footsteps of travelers, to the breathing of the worlds. Yet his listening was not tiring. It was as if he were part of the great rhythm of sound itself. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, he would hear things others could not. The faint drip of water beneath Yggdrasil's roots, or the soft murmur of Midgard's waves far below. When Odin visited him, their conversations were slow and sparse. Odin would ask what he had heard. Heimdall would answer with short descriptions, never stories, just gentle observations like notes in a calm song. Loki's place among the gods was less settled. He was welcome, yet often wandered alone. He liked to experiment with small illusions, the shimmer of light that made a flower appear blue instead of white, or a sound that seemed to come from nowhere. The others tolerated these things with mild amusement. Thor sometimes shook his head. Frigg smiled faintly. Odin watched with quiet curiosity. Loki did not mean harm. He enjoyed change the way one enjoys turning a stone to see what lies beneath. When he sat with the others, he often brought small surprises, an oddly shaped leaf, a riddle, or a half-finished tale that faded before its end. The gods learned to accept that not all of his creations were meant to last. Asgard's halls grew more numerous over time, each god and goddess built according to their nature. Frigg's hall had walls lined with woven cloths that shifted in hue with the light. Thor's hall, Bilskirnir, was broad and open, with long benches and a hearth that glowed softly even when unlit. Loki's dwelling was smaller, tucked between two streams, its walls smooth as if shaped by water. These halls were not crowded. The gods visited one another when they wished, bringing small gifts, fruit, carved wood, or gentle stories. Evenings often ended in long stretches of shared quiet when only the sound of wind against the walls filled the space. Not all was perfect, but even discord arrived slowly. Once, Thor grew frustrated with Loki for reshaping a section of cloud into a face that watched the sky for a full day. Thor thought it unsettling. Loki laughed softly, saying it was only a harmless whim. They argued, though not with shouts, only a low exchange of words, ending with Thor walking away to cool his thoughts beside a river. Later, Loki sent a small fish leaping from the water toward Thor's hand as an apology. Thor caught it, smiled faintly, and the matter ended there. Another time, Frigg found her woven cloths subtly altered. Threads of silver had been replaced with ones of green and gold. She noticed at once that it was Loki's doing. When she asked him why, he shrugged and said he thought the light would move more gently that way. Frigg examined the change and after a pause, agreed. She left it as it was, and from then on her hall glowed with a faint green tint during sunset. These small events, tiny disagreements, quiet reconciliations, were the beginnings of what mortals would later call the moods of gods. Yet, in those early days, nothing lasted long enough to trouble the peace of Asgard. The gods understood that each difference, each act of change, had its place. They saw that calm was not the absence of movement, but the steady rhythm of all things adjusting gently to one another. Outside Asgard, the other realms stirred faintly. Midgard was young, its forests grew thick, its seas calm but deep. The dwarves beneath the earth began to carve their slow tunnels. The elves of Alfheim tended to their meadows, singing songs so soft they could be mistaken for the wind. Sometimes Odin would close his eyes and listen, hearing faint echoes of these distant lives. He spoke to Frigg of sending quiet messengers, not to command, but to observe. Frigg agreed, and so the ravens flew farther than before, their shadows passing over still waters and sleeping fields. The gods began to notice the passage of time more clearly. The sun seemed to linger differently with each season, and the stars moved slightly between years. Baldur marked these changes, counting how long light stayed on the peaks of Asgard's towers. He found quiet pleasure in these patterns. Thor measured time by thunder, how long between one gentle storm and the next. Heimdall measured it by sound, the distance between two faint echoes. Loki measured it by change, how many new shapes he could form before the world returned to stillness. Odin, ever patient, simply watched it all, gathering understanding like dew gathering on a leaf. Occasionally, Odin gathered the gods beneath Yggdrasil for long councils. They sat in a circle of smooth stones. No one hurried the talk. They spoke about what had been noticed in Midgard, how the dwarves' tools sang faintly underground, how the elves' light shimmered even across realms. They spoke, too, of care, how to keep balance among the worlds without pressing upon them. Odin preferred listening. Frigg's voice, when she spoke, carried calm weight. Loki's thoughts often drifted, but even his quiet interruptions brought moments of reflection. At dusk, after such councils, the gods lingered beneath the tree. The roots of Yggdrasil reached far below, humming softly as if carrying the breath of all existence. Thor leaned against a trunk, arms folded. Frigg rested her hands in her lap. Odin looked up toward the leaves, which caught the fading light like a calm sea. None of them wished to leave too quickly. They stayed until night fell completely, and the first stars shimmered in the dark like tiny, unhurried fires. The nights in Asgard were never fully dark. A faint glow, neither from the sun nor from any flame, hung in the air, as though the realm itself breathed light. The gods slept easily. Their dreams were long and slow, sometimes blending together like watercolors on wet paper. Odin dreamed of endless skies, Frigg of quiet gardens, Thor of soft thunderclouds rolling without sound, and Loki of shapes that flowed one into another until he woke with a small, amused smile. Thus passed the early ages of Asgard's harmony. No one knew yet what changes time would bring, but there was no hurry to find out. The gods were content to watch, to think, to shape the edges of the world a little at a time. The air stayed calm, the light steady, and the rhythm of existence continued, unbroken, unhurried, and soft. In the stillness of the early ages, when Asgard was steady and its halls glowed with quiet gold, Odin began to turn his thoughts outward. The world tree, Yggdrasil, stood vast and unmoving, its roots spreading through the unseen spaces, its branches stretching beyond the reach of even divine sight. It was said that every realm hung upon those roots and branches, held not by force, but by balance, a balance so gentle that only silence could truly sense it. When Odin sat in Valaskjalf, he would rest his chin upon his hand and let his one eye drift across the horizons. He did not seek conquest or glory. Those ideas had no weight yet. He only wondered how far creation went. The air carried faint murmurs, the distant breathing of lands unseen, and he felt that knowing them might help him understand the great shape of all things. So began the slow watching of the other realms. Midgard was still young then, softer than it would later become. Its seas were wide and smooth, its forests deep and heavy with mist. The air smelled of wet stone and green leaves. No humans had yet built homes or lit fires, but the shape of their coming was already folded into the soil. When the gods first looked upon Midgard, they did so with calm interest. From Asgard's high vantage, they saw its mountains rise like sleeping beasts, its rivers winding patiently through valleys. Odin watched the way sunlight slid across the surface of the water, and thought that perhaps one day it might hold reflections of faces that would look back at the sky. Thor visited Midgard often. He did not thunder there, not yet, but walked slowly through its field, his step soft, his hammer resting easily in his hand. The air was thick with mist that clung to his beard and shoulders. He would listen to the distant rush of waterfalls, the whisper of leaves moving without wind. Sometimes he would sit for hours beside a river, tossing small pebbles into the current, watching the ripples spread and fade. Loki, curious as ever, liked Midgard's strangeness. He played with its shapes, stirring clouds into thin spirals or tracing faint patterns in the sand. Frigg told him gently not to disturb too much. The world was still finding its own rhythm. Loki nodded, though now and then he left behind a strange glimmer, a trick of light that might one day inspire wonder or fear among mortals. Odin would sometimes send Hugin and Munin to fly across Midgard. They returned with quiet impressions, the scent of rain, the feel of salt upon the wind, the faint vibration of the earth settling beneath the weight of time. Odin listened, nodded, and thought that this world would one day be both fragile and enduring, a realm of balance, as all things were meant to be. Far beyond the gentle skies of Asgard and the soft greens of Midgard lay Jotunheim, the realm of the Jotnar, the giants. It was not a place of chaos, not yet. It was simply larger. Everything in Jotunheim seemed stretched beyond proportion. Mountains higher, rivers broader, trees older and darker. The air carried a faint echo as if it were always remembering something long past. The giants were not all fierce. Many were quiet beings who shaped the earth without anger. They moved slowly, their thoughts long and deliberate. They watched the stars at night, naming them in low tones that rolled through the valleys like distant thunder. Still, there was an unease between Asgard and Jotunheim, not hostility, but difference. The gods valued order and calm, while the giants valued vastness and solitude. When Odin visited Jotunheim, he did not come as a conqueror, but as a guest. He walked between cliffs that rose like walls of old sleep. The ground was rough beneath his boots, the sky a deep gray. The giants greeted him with nods and short words. They spoke little, but their silences carried meaning. Odin listened, and from them he learned that wisdom could come not only from knowing, but from waiting. It was said that Mimir, the Wise One, dwelt there by a quiet well, a pool so still that even the faintest drop caused ripples that lasted minutes. Odin came to that place more than once, and though their meetings would one day grow fateful, in those early times they were simple exchanges. Slow questions, slower answers, and long pauses between them. The gods returned to Asgard with a deeper patience after visiting Jotunheim. They had seen how even the vast could be peaceful, how strength did not always shout. Toward the eastern branches of Yggdrasil lay Alfheim, a place that glimmered faintly like sunlight seen through a fine mist. It was not bright in the way of fire, but in the way of a calm morning after rain. The elves there were quiet beings of light and motion. They tended to meadows where flowers glowed faintly, and streams wound through soft grass like threads of silver. They moved gracefully, but without haste, their laughter low and rhythmic. Freyr, one of the Vanir gods who had joined the Aesir in peace, was given rule over Alfheim. He did not command it, so much as dwell within it, blending into its calm rhythm. He often sat beneath willow-like trees, watching the way reflections wavered on the water's surface. His hall was not made of stone, but of woven branches that let the breeze pass through. The elves shared their songs with him, not songs with melody and words, but long tones that carried the feeling of slow time passing. When Odin visited, he listened in stillness, saying afterward that the songs reminded him of dreams he could never quite remember. Alfheim was gentle, but it taught the gods that beauty too could be a kind of strength, a quiet endurance that asked for no recognition. Below Midgard, where the roots of Yggdrasil touched stone and metal veins, lay Svartalfheim, home of the dwarves. The air there was cool and heavy with the scent of iron and dust. It was always dim, but never dark. Soft glows came from forges and crystals embedded in the rock. The dwarves worked patiently, shaping things not for beauty, but for balance. Their tools rang in steady rhythm, not loud, but constant, like heartbeats echoing in stone. They made things that lasted, hinges that would not rust, blades that would not dull, cups that stayed warm in the hand. Odin admired their craft. He often walked their tunnels, stooping beneath low ceilings, tracing fingers over smooth walls. The dwarves did not bow or boast. They simply nodded and kept working. To them, creation was a quiet duty. One of the dwarves, Brock, once showed Thor a hammerhead that had cooled too quickly, leaving faint cracks along its edge. Thor studied it closely, curious about its flaws. Even stone remembers its making, Brock said simply. Thor nodded. It was a lesson he carried for a long time. At the furthest edges of all realms, where Yggdrasil's branches met its unseen roots, lay the oldest places of all. Niflheim, the land of mist and cold, and Muspelheim, the land of fire. They were not realms of life nor of death. They were conditions, quiet, yet absolute. Niflheim was still and breathless. Its air was so fine it barely moved, filled with a white haze that never lifted. Beneath its surface, water flowed in slow veins of ice, whispering faintly as it froze and melted in endless cycles. Odin sometimes thought of it when he sought calm. The idea of stillness without end comforted him. Muspelheim, by contrast, was pure motion, yet not wild. Its fires burned steadily, not roaring, but humming. The light there was constant, though it flickered faintly, like breath. Surtur, who dwelt there, tended the flames. In those early days, he was not an enemy, but a guardian. He knew the fire's purpose was not yet to destroy, but to wait. The gods rarely visited these two realms. They did not fear them. They simply understood that such places existed beyond the rhythm of their daily peace, reminders that even within creation there were boundaries where meaning gave way to pure existence. In time, the gods learned to see the 9 realms not as separate worlds, but as notes in a single quiet song. Each realm had its tone: Midgard's soft green, Jotunheim's low gray, Alfheim's pale shimmer, Svartalfheim's deep hum. Together they made a harmony too subtle to hear all at once. Only Yggdrasil, vast and patient, could hold them in balance. At dusk, when the light in Asgard grew thin and golden, Odin would sometimes sit by the edge of Bifrost and look down upon the faint glow of other worlds. He said little. The others joined him, one by one. Thor leaning on his hammer, Frigg with her hands folded, Baldur standing quietly beside them. They watched in stillness as small winds drifted between the realms, carrying whispers too faint to understand. No one spoke of destiny or endings then. The worlds were whole, the gods untroubled. The great cycle had only begun its slow turning, and the night, stretching softly across all realms, was deep and dreamless.